Hey YouTube, welcome back to our channel. My name is Elena.
And I'm Bjorn.
And this is Vikings React, where we take a look at some of your favorite Viking TV shows and discuss their historical accuracies.
So today, we're going to talk a little bit about Norsemen. We're going to talk about the passing of power. We're going to talk about burial practices. We're going to talk about runestick carvings.
If I die, Odin forbid, I want you to be chieftain, not that girly boy Orm.
So on his deathbed, Chieftain Olaf decides to make Arvid his successor. And Arvid rightly makes the observation that Orm should actually be the successor and next in line to rule because he is Chieftain Olaf's brother. Now, it's important to distinguish here that Olaf's standing as chieftain is actually akin to him being a goatee, or the highest class of the free men. He has the responsibility of keeping the rule of law, and he could have actually been a priest of the Norse religion. Chieftains, or goatee, were of Icelandic origin. In Norway, where the show is actually set, they would have had a Carl or a Jarl that would have been leading the village. In either case, whether we're talking about Jarls or chieftains here, the passing of power was often hereditary. So if Olaf would have had a son, the power would have passed to him. Since he didn't, the power would actually be passed to his brother, in this case, Orm.
But Orm is next in line, so wouldn't that sour the mood a little?
There are no examples that actually come to mind of a chieftain or a jarl passing his power down to somebody who was not part of his family lineage.
Everyone here knows that I am next in line. And if you have a problem with that, then we have something called the Blood Eagle.
But in cases that a new successor was not well liked by the people or was not fit enough to lead, somebody could actually overthrow them, which would start a new line of succession.
So in this part of the episode, Chieftain Olaf has died. Spoilers! He was killed by Orm because he found out that Arvid was going to take the throne, and he didn't want that to happen. He wanted to keep power for himself. So he killed his brother. They put him on the raft and set him out on the lake. They're trying to ignite the raft and set his pyre alight, as it were. So this is seen as like the epitome of a Viking funeral practice. We actually have a written account from Ibn Fadlan, the Muslim missionary in modern-day Iran, who traveled up into modern-day Russia and spent a lot of time with the Rus and witnessed their practices. But he actually was able to witness a chieftain in the local area being entombed, and part of it was by this funeral pyre on a ship. So the funeral itself went on for, I believe, a few days, actually. It was led by a woman who was deemed the Angel of Death. She was this mystical woman that oversaw the entire ceremony, made sure that everything was going as it should. She handled all of the practices and the ritual aspects of the entombment, of the burial of the pyre. As part of it, everybody got drunk. There were oaths and prayers made for his passing. There was a servant girl of his that was actually selected to be buried with him. She took part in a lot of various ritualistic practice. She was then hoisted up above them over like a makeshift threshold where she could essentially view over the doors of the dead and see into the afterlife, into Valhalla. And there's a prayer. It's attributed as a Viking prayer, but she was quoted as saying a few things as she was hoisted up, and she would see a new aspect of the afterlife. You know, lo there do I see my fathers, my sisters, and my brothers, back the line back to the beginning. She was later killed and buried along with him in the ship. People would bring offerings and gifts and lay them down in the ship as well, and then it was set ablaze. During this practice, actually, one of the Rus men actually told Ibn Fadlan that his people are wrong to bury the dead, because then the worms would eat them slowly and it would take their body a lot longer to reach the afterlife, as opposed to setting it aflame and having their spirit be released immediately upon being burned and go into the heavens that way. We don't know if this is like a Slavic practice precisely, or if it was a larger extent something that was practiced throughout all of Scandinavia. So beyond pyres, there's actually a lot of examples of people just simply being entombed in the ground, or in ships and wagons, and sometimes both, as is evident in the Oseberg grave find, where this woman believed to be a mystic seeress was buried in a ship with a wagon in it, and then that was put into the ground. Sometimes they were actually burned in a pyre and then buried, which is evident in the Yermambu find in Norway, where we get the helmet and the byrni from. That individual was actually set ablaze and had a funeral pyre made for him from there, and then the remains were buried in like an ancestral grave, which is pretty cool too. When somebody would get entombed, people would come up and make offerings to them. Basically, it was believed that what you were buried with or what you buried yourself was taken with you into the afterlife. So people would give them what they felt like they would need in the next life. That can be weaponry, swords, armor, shields, helmets, knives, gaming boards, all the way down to just simple buckets and spoons and things like that. A lot of the time, animals were also ritualistically sacrificed and buried with the entombed as well. There are accounts of oxen and horses being driven to exhaustion before being killed and buried as part of the ceremony, as well as dogs and even peacocks, believe it or not. How the Norse treated the dead was very important to them. There was a lot of care and a lot of special attention given to them regardless of how they were entombed, whether it was through burial or through a pyre, as was seen in the show. Now, most often you'd want to light the boat. That's kind of a key thing to do. And Orm did try his best. That honor did fall on him, and he did about as good as we could expect him to do.
If Thor and Odin had wanted me to hit, then I would have done it, and I think that's very important just to respect that. What are they?
Rune sticks about me, and they're very childish messages, I have to say.
Wow.
So by this point in the show, we know that Orm is not very well liked among the villagers. He has taken over as chieftain, but nobody really respects him or likes him very much. They just kind of deal with the fact that he's there, and that he is their chieftain now.
I'm really, really disappointed. You shouldn't boo your own chieftain. That's just a child's knowledge.
And in this point in the show, Orm catches wind that there had been some runestick carvings that were made to basically make fun of him.
I pray to Thor and Odin that you, my dear sister-in-law, are not responsible for this.
I honestly have no clue what you're talking about.
Now, a lot of what we hear about Scandinavians in the Viking Age is that they did not have a written form of language, or a written form of language to the point where they could actually write down stories and express themselves. And that's not necessarily true. The trouble was actually that the materials that they had to write on, such as wood and bone, didn't quite stand up to the test of time. So over the centuries, they've degraded to the point where we don't really have a lot of examples that we found. This is in contrast with English manuscripts that were highly valued and protected by the church, so they survived much, much longer. Now, the form of writing that Scandinavians used back in the Viking Age was called the Younger Futhark, which is a form of runic writing that began to take over for the Elder Futhark back in the mid-7th century. Runic writings took on two separate forms. On the one hand, each of the runes had an esoteric meaning attached to it, and they could be used in very specific ways for magical purposes. One of the examples that we have of this comes from Egil's saga, when Egil came to stay with a family where a young girl was very, very sick and bedridden. Now, while he's staying with the family, he comes to discover that somebody had carved some runes into a whalebone and placed it under this young girl's pillow so that she may get better. However, the way that the runes were written, it was actually doing the opposite, and it was making the young girl more sick. So what Egil did was he scratched off the runes that were already there, and he wrote different runes that would actually help the girl and placed it back under her pillow. And within the next few days, she miraculously started to get better. This story goes to show the significance that the runes had and how powerful they were believed to be, and also the importance of using them correctly.
You're going to carve exactly what it says here, and then afterwards we'll compare and see whose carving resembles this the most.
On the other hand, accounts of findings that we have show the runes being used as just your typical alphabet. We have runestones that we found that depict historical events in runes. We have also found items such as buckets and combs that have runes that translate to "this belongs to a certain person." And we also actually have some accounts of graffiti that they had left us. On one of the Orkney Islands in Scotland, there is a Neolithic burial chamber where they actually found some Viking Age runes. They were written about 8 feet up on the wall, and once they were finally translated, they actually read "Thulfir carved these very high up." Now this is just one of the carvings out of about 30 found at that same site. And a lot of them do date back to the 12th century, which is just past the Viking Age, but the people who had carved them could still be considered Vikings. Yet another example of this is the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, which is this gorgeous temple. On one of the staircases, about halfway up on one of the steps, there are Viking runes that translate to "Halfdan carved these runes."
So you think this is just an innocent joke?
It's humor.
Humor?
Yes.
Thank you so much for watching, guys. We hope you enjoyed it. As of the recording of this video, we have just hit 70 subscribers, so thank you guys so much for being here with us. We're really, really excited to be doing this and having a lot of fun with it. Make sure to hit that like button. If you are new here, and if this is your first time watching us, hello. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of our future videos so that you can keep up with us and learn more about Vikings. And we'll see you in the next one.
So, the practices in which the Norsemen did things was good. And that's my thesis. The end.